start off with the aftermath of Anthony Joshua following his victory against Jermaine Franklin. A few details have emerged, which I find interesting and something that we've got to consider when we're talking about the future of AJ. I want to start off discussing something that Ra Hocken brought up. Ra is a freelance boxing correspondent. He's done some work for Punch Out Boxing. You might have seen him interview a few fighters, Italma and so on and so forth. And he sent a tweet to say that Lennox Lewis looked equally unimpressive in some of his fights with Manny Stewart, notably his lucky decision against Mercer. And all the talk was that he'd get obliterated by Holyfield and Tyson. I think if James is given time, AJ can get to the top by 2024. He goes on to say another possibility could be that AJ may have been remaining in low gear to give his rivals the idea that he's shot and now safe to take on the way Usyk did against Derek Chisora. Now, I actually disagree with this take, but before I explain why I disagree, let's toy with this idea and let's consider certain things that could add weight to the argument of Ra here. Well, first and foremost, if you're considering the fact that Anthony Joshua has struggled to make fights against Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury in the past, and you blame those guys for not being able to make the fight happen, you might look at this and say, well, Anthony Joshua is a major reward, right? Financially speaking. And if the risk factor has fallen, then it changes the dynamic, the balance of the question of risk versus reward. These top fighters aren't afraid of fighting. They're not scared, oh man, Anthony Joshua might beat me up. Oh man, Deontay Wilder might hurt me. They don't think along those lines. They trust in their own skill set. But when you are a brand and there's an awful lot of money at stake, you might be sitting there thinking to yourself, if I lose this, it's going to cost me so much money long term. It's going to cost me my status, my position. I don't want to risk that. So it becomes a question of risk versus reward. Now, Eddie Hearn recently was talking on TalkSport, and he was asked about the biggest cash cows in the sport, and he was saying it's Anthony Joshua, Canelo Alvarez, and Tyson Fury. Now, in the past, he's never really brought up Fury in that regard, but he has now. He feels obviously that he's emerged into that mold. Well, you're talking therefore about two of the three top pound-for-pound fighters, cash cow fighters in the sport potentially facing up against each other. So when you're talking about risk versus reward, the risk factor, if AJ is not the guy he used to be, declines, and the reward is massive. So it starts to entice potential opponents. In addition to that, Eddie Hearn has also, for the first time that I've seen, he said that Tyson Fury would be the favourite to beat Anthony Joshua, but that AJ is capable of boxing an awful lot better than he did against Jermaine Franklin. Why would he say that? Is he just sucking up and trying to be nice in the hope that they can, instead of going through that arrogant sort of approach that he's used in the past, they can sort of hope to almost, what's the word I'm looking for? Calm, shall we say, Fury into accepting a fight? Or is this a case of playing possum? Anthony Joshua thinks he's weaker, or he's acting as though he's weaker. Eddie Hearn thinks, listen, AJ's not the guy we thought he was, and Fury's the hot favourite now, but listen, we're willing to take the fight, almost as though they're going hat in hand and like they're just going to roll over, when in reality they're chomping at the bit to get their hands on Fury or Wilder or whoever. Is that a possibility? Now, the reason I don't agree, and the reason I don't think that's the case, I've just made the case for R, okay? Like I say, we play the defence and the prosecution on this channel. But the reason I don't agree with that approach is because DAZN have invested so much into Anthony Joshua. And the fact of the matter is his stock has fallen drastically. They've spoken about the fact that they've gained an additional 300,000 subscribers since this AJ fight was announced. Now, you have to understand that when you're talking about Anthony Joshua gaining new fans, you're not talking really about hardcore boxing fans. The hardcore boxing fans would have already signed up to DAZN. I mean, DAZN have got a brilliant schedule at the moment, you have to say. And I was critical about their price changes and stuff like that, but the schedule really looks good at the moment. Well, if you're a hardcore boxing fan, you're signing up for that. So it's more sports fans, more fans that, you know, sort of look to cross over from football or cricket or whatever else, and they're interested in the big names that they recognize. Now, when it comes to those sorts of fans, it's not that one-off monthly subscription that matters. It's the customer retention. In order to get customer retention, when they've invested their $19.99, because like I said, it's unlikely they've invested the £100 for the year. If they've given $19.99, the equivalent of a pay-per-view, unless they absolutely love the content in that month, the chances of them saying, you know what, this ain't that bad, I kind of like it, I'm going to renew, become drastically lower. And Anthony Joshua, whilst for the purist, for the hardcore boxing fan, there were some interesting technical moments last night and tactical battles, it wasn't vintage AJ, and it wasn't super exciting keeping you on the edge of your seat and seeing one heavyweight obliterate another. So the chances of customer retention when it comes to crossover fans I would suggest are quite low. Additionally to that, Anthony Joshua hasn't had a win since Kubrat Pulev. His confidence seems to be rock bottom. The last thing he's got the luxury of doing is what some people feel Alexander Usyk did against Chisora. I personally don't feel that Usyk did that, by the way. I just felt that stylistically Chisora gave him a good run for his money early on, and Usyk started to sort of settle and then started to take over in the fight. But if Usyk did play that game, you have to understand that he was a highly decorated cruiserweight, undefeated. His stock was continually rising, and he was in the Who Needs Him club. And if you remember, there was this one clip of AJ looking dead into the camera. There was almost like a sarcastic look in his eyes, like, this is the dude that you lot think is going to beat me. And he's looking directly into the camera at this point, and he's holding his gaze into the camera when they're about to read out the scorecards. This is the guy. That may have worked as a tactic, because Usyk's not having to convince the world that he's a legitimate contender. What he's trying to do in that position is put himself in a position where he's getting a shot, but maybe letting the rivals think he's weaker than he actually is. Like I said, I don't feel that he did that, but I understand the logic of that argument. AJ's situation is different. Stock has fallen, confidence is shot. He needs to rebuild that confidence. He needs to go and obliterate someone. He needs to get fans talking again. Anthony Joshua, in order to apply pressure on the bigger guys, the big names in the division to take him on. See what I mean? So I have to humbly and respectfully disagree with Ra, but you may agree with him. Let me know in the comment sections down below. The other thing I also want to bring up is that Anthony Joshua gave an interview with Seconds Out, and I think this speaks to where he's at mentally at the moment. He was suggesting that the reason he reacted the way he did following the Alexander Usyk fight is that when Vasyl Lomachenko referred to him as strong, he interpreted that to be a racially charged comment. He elaborated to explain how there's almost this expectation that because he's African, he must be strong, as though he's being put into a box essentially, rather than him receiving respect for his technique. Now, to me, that looks like somebody who's really reaching. And it's a situation whereby, I don't speak Ukrainian, but I'm fluent in Greek. And I can tell you that in Greek, for instance, the word strong, for a start, doesn't necessarily mean physically strong. So the word is dinados. If I was to say dinados antibalos, that means a strong opponent, but it's not physically strong. It means their level is strong. Their level is very good. So a Greek could refer to somebody in translation as, yeah, he's really strong, and he's not actually talking about strength, physical strength. Vasyl Lomachenko has also referred in the past to George Kambosos as strong. When he was talking about potential undisputed title fight against Kambosos, he was saying, yeah, listen, he's a good lightweight, he's a strong lightweight. Strength, physical strength, isn't what you would associate with Kambosos. He's got other attributes. He's got a good trigger counter, he's tenacious, he's got good stamina. He's not physically strong as a lightweight. So to me, it doesn't look like he's even talking about what AJ's talking about. But even if he was and he's saying you're physically strong, that doesn't mean he's put you in a box. You're a big muscular man. You're strong, right? So AJ, for me, it's almost as though he's in this place mentally of a victim right now. He's got a victim mentality. The world is against me sort of thing. And maybe that's why he's got this paranoia about him. You've got everybody running me down. You've got all these media organizations. They're putting me down. They're questioning, is this guy overrated? Is he this? Is he that? And maybe that's why he's felt the need to get away. But the problem is, when you've got that mentality, there's one of two ways it can go. It can either be an us against the world situation. I'm going to silence everyone. I'm going to shut everyone up and prove them wrong. Or alternatively, you can start feeling sorry for yourself. And to me, the way AJ looks, he looks like a guy who's feeling sorry for himself. I really do think he needs to get a grip of his mentality. I've always felt that Anthony Joshua has got something akin to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. What happened to him, first with Vladimir, would have made him question some things. He came through it, but he would have questioned himself. Am I as invincible as I thought? But then with Andy Ruiz, that would have been a really traumatic experience. You have to understand, he went to the United States. Ruiz was a replacement opponent. He was initially going to fight Jarrell Miller. Ruiz does not look aesthetically like the part. And this was his announcement to the United States. This was his big moment. And he fell short and he got stopped. And people were questioning, did he give up? And he's sitting in the corner and he's going, why am I feeling this? That is a traumatic experience. So I think he's got something akin to PTSD. Now, when it comes to PTSD, remember, you are able to change a fragile mind. You are able to mold a fragile mind into something more positive. In other words, there is a way back potentially, but it does take time. That's my take on AJ. Let me know what you think about his comments regarding Vasyl Lomachenko. Do you think that Vasyl Lomachenko, who's clearly not fluent in English, meant anything remotely malicious? Or do you think that Anthony Joshua is overanalyzing? And if he is overanalyzing, why? What is going on through his mind? Do you see it the way I see it? And that he's almost feeling like everybody's after him, like he feels like a victim, and that that's not conducive with being the heavyweight champion of the world, unless you're going to use that to where he wants to silence the world. Let me know what you think, ladies and gents. Moving on from that, let's talk about FABIO WARDLEY and Wardley-Coffie. It was a premature stoppage, there's no doubt about that. The referee, Howard Foster, was far too keen to jump in for the stoppage once again. He's got previous with this, of course. You know, George Groves once said that he felt that Froch was hurt more severely in multiple occasions than he was when he was stopped, right? So in other words, in that same fight, if you're going to stop me for that, you could have stopped Carl multiple occasions prior to that. So a lot of people feel wary about Howard Foster. And listen, man, it's a very hard job. Don't get me wrong. Because you're sitting there, you're seeing two big guys. One of them's landing some shots on the other. If you wait a little bit too long, you could see someone get seriously hurt. So you're talking about a few seconds sometimes with the delicate balancing act. But at the same time, you have to understand that the integrity of the sport relies on referees being able to get that judgment correct. You have to understand, if Wardley is putting in this massive effort to get Coffie out of there, who knows how to roll with shots, he's catching shots, he's surviving. If Wardley doesn't get him out of there, he's then gassed. There's going to be a period where his output will drop drastically. And once it drops drastically, he's going to need time to recover. Well, now you've got another heavyweight who's coming at you, and he's going to be able to start teeing off on you, and you can barely catch your breath. You could be the one that ends up getting knocked out. It's not the first time we've seen a fighter put in a big effort and then he couldn't get the guy out of there, and then he's the one that ends up getting stopped. So it really affects the integrity of the sport when you're jumping in too quickly. Now, in terms of Wardley and his general performance, you know, I have to hold my hands up and say, you know me, right? When I get something correct when it comes to analysis, I'll come here and I'll tell you guys, yeah, I'm not surprised that Biv will beat Canelo. I told you guys he would if they're both at their best. That I can't see how Canelo beats him. I'm not surprised Alexander Usyk got the better of Anthony Joshua the first time around. I'm telling you, I believe that Fury would have beaten Klitschko when nobody else did. And I gloat about it, right? Well, by the same token, I'm humble enough to be able to say, I got this completely wrong. And if there's one guy I've always undermined, without meaning to, it's FABIO WARDLEY. I thought Gorman would get the better of him. I just see so many technical errors there that I expect him to come unstuck time and time again. But he's got so much bottle, he's got so much heart. Once he takes a bit of a pasting early on, he wakes up. And he carries a lot of pop in that right hand. And he's got that grip between his teeth, the eye of the tiger, and he's able to get through certain challenges. And you have to say it's very impressive. Having said all that, I can't just ignore certain technical deficiencies that he has. He was overloading massively against Coffie from the start. And there were a lot of shots that he was throwing that weren't really on. He's a little bit out of range, a bit too far out. And Coffee's able to just roll and he's leaning back sort of behind the shoulder. And he's just protecting himself. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, this is a potential banana skin here. If Coffee's able to weather the early storm and then pick his moments later on, this could be dangerous here, right? But he always seems to find a way, Wardley. And so when there's all this talk about him fighting Adelaide, for instance, that's a fight I find really interesting. Because Adelaide has some really good technical stuff. And we know he's a really good athlete as well. But like many people, I felt Adelaide actually lost the Sokolovsky fight. And whilst Sokolovsky knows a few veteran moves and a few skills that I'm sure FABIO WARDLEY has yet to learn, in terms of his offensive arsenal, Wardley is a much more dangerous guy. He's a lot more likely to hurt you. So the question is, as Adelaide steps up to fight the likes of FABIO WARDLEY, how would he cope? Would he be able to take what Wardley has to dish out? And that's what makes it so intriguing. Of the three potential opponents for FABIO WARDLEY, Fraser Clark, Adelaide and Dacres, who would you like to see him fight and why? Now let's move on to Robeisy Ramirez against Isaac Dogboe, right? Listen, I asked on Twitter, my Ghanaians out there, is it Dogboe or Dogboe? How do you pronounce it? And I got a response from Black Nkrumah. You have not helped me, bro. I appreciate you trying to help me, but I'm digging myself into a deeper hole right here. He basically said it's Dog-Gbae. So I said, so is it like Dogboe? And he said the G and the B should be pronounced together. It gives a heavy B sound. So then is it Dogboe? I don't know, man. Before you Ghanaians are laughing at me out there, just remember, If I get you to start pronouncing Greek names, Aristodelios, Panagoulias, or something like that, you're going to struggle too. So stop laughing. I'm going to be calling him Dogboe. If I'm butchering it, I'm sorry. But when I was reading all over Twitter, it seemed to be that people were saying he got schooled. Dogboe got schooled. Ramirez won wide. I look at the scorecards. It looks like he absolutely cruised the fight. Then I sat down tonight and I watched the fight. I did not see it like that at all. Unless we're not counting body shots anymore, then this was a close fight. I had Ramirez winning the fight 7-5. There was a knockdown at the end. I would add that additionally, of course, to a scorecard because you have to. But I do not think it was a legitimate knockdown. You look at the left foot of Dogboe. He clearly steps on Ramirez's foot, loses his footing, and then there's almost like this clipping, cupping shot, which just gets him further off balance. That's not a knockdown. So he had a right to be fuming at the end of the fight. And although I say, listen, it's 7-5, there were numerous swing rounds in there. So even if Dogboe's walked away from that thinking, I actually feel like I did enough, I'm not really holding it against him. The scorecards I felt was shocking. It was a fight of two halves. Early in the fight, Dogboe was landing to the body an awful lot. And one of the things that Ramirez does, when he's backing off, he puts up that high guard and he backs out. And so it's hard to land with your second phase of attack. You'll land that first shot, and as you try to go to the second shot to the body, you can land, but he's pulling away. It's hard to land combinations on him. But nonetheless, if he's not throwing back in those moments, even if you're throwing 3 shots and you only land 1 to the body, you're landing and he's not. So when you hear the commentary team say things like, Ramirez is landing 50% of his power shots and Dogboe's only landing 25% or 30%, so what? If you're throwing 10 punches and you land 5 on me, and I throw 3 punches and I land 3 on you, I've got a 100% record. But you still outlanded me by a couple of punches. Who's landing the shots? Now, listen, it wasn't quite like that because, like I said, they were close rounds. I'm not making out like it was easy to score. It wasn't. It was actually a hard fight to score. There were a number of rounds in there that were close. But he wasn't getting a lot of credit for what he was doing. A lot of the talk was, he's missing wildly. The body counts, ladies and gents. And Ramirez, moving forward, has to address certain things because, in my opinion, as big of a fan of his as I am, I think he's immensely talented and he's got a massive future in the sport. And he's got a terrific trainer in his corner in Ismail Salas. Everything is lined up for him, especially when you then got Top Rank there too. So the red carpet's been rolled out and there's no doubt that he can become a superstar. However, there are certain patterns of his work that make him a little bit susceptible to being hit when you throw punches that are lower of a low trajectory. And Dogboe early in the fight was able to find some success with that. You see, early on, he'd have his guard up and then he sort of comes down. He comes low and he's opening up his stance. And by coming low, if you throw the shot, he'll come down and then throw a shot from there. And sometimes he'll slip inside, despite the fact that he's a southpaw, he'll slip into what is theoretically a dangerous zone and then throw an uppercut or a shovel hook. Or he'll dip inside and then throw a hook, a right hook around the guard. So you start to see this variation come from him and it's threatening because he's heavy-handed, right? But the fact of the matter is, more often than not, the pattern is to drop low, change the dynamic low, and then go from there. He'll bypass, in other words, in quite a consistent pattern. So what Dogboe started to do was to shoot shots low under the correct advice of Barry Hunter. Throw the jab, as he comes low, throw an uppercut, throw a wide hook to the body, and he's going to duck into it. If he doesn't and he stands up tall, you're going to land to the body. If he ducks low, you could potentially land to the head. And so then he starts to back off. And as he's backing off, because he's got that high guard as he steps out, yes, you might not land combinations, but you're still landing shots to the body as he's stepping out. So you started to see the backhand land into the body as well. And so he was getting outworked early onto the body. And what he's very good at doing, he is very good at changing the angle and then coming back at you. And he can let go of some blistering combinations. He was a little bit too tentative, in my opinion, and looking to counterpunch Dogboe way too much. He needed to be leading off a little bit more. But when he was active with his hands, you saw that there were some blistering combinations there and he looked brilliant. And as the fight started to wear on, he started to get that distance a little bit better and he started to let go of his hands a lot more and he started to win a lot of the latter rounds. So he really switched the fight around. But early on, I had Dogboe starting the better and he wasn't really getting the credit and he certainly didn't get it from the judges. The point is, Ramirez is a terrific fighter, there's no doubt about it. But I've seen a lot of people talk about how this was a masterclass and Dogboe was very game but didn't offer much. I didn't see it that way at all. He was landing to the body, and I can understand why he was annoyed, and I can understand why he wants a rematch as well. And it was a fun fight, so who could hold it against him for wanting to run it back? Let me know what you think, ladies and gents, about all the things we've spoken about here today. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.